Hi, I'm Megan LaCore from theartofmegan.com, and today we're going to be spinning 2 singles into a plied yarn. So I've got my spindle. I've got it set up as a top spindle or a top-whorl spindle with our whorl at the top closest to our hook, with all of our space down here, and this is where we're going to wind on. So we're going to start with our 2 singles that we already spun and wound into a center pull ball. I'm going to loosen up the ball a little bit, get a little bit to work with, and then I'm just going to wrap the ends onto the spindle. So we're just going to get them anchored. And then we're going to wrap up and around to our hook. And with our singles, we spun from the top of our thigh on our right leg down to our knee. So we want to actually spin in the opposite direction of that to ply them together. So I'm going to be spinning from the top of my left thigh down to my knee. So I'm going to start by just holding a little bit up, putting a little bit of twist into it, and I'm just going to unhook that and let some of that twist run down to our yarn that we wound on. Put that back up, and I'm just going to kind of feed them together until they're nice and balanced. Now, we can tell when we have a balanced yarn when we have all of our twist up. It doesn't curl back quite as much on itself, so that's an easy way to tell if you need to let it separate a little bit more or if you need to put a little bit more twist into it. So here I'm just going to add a little bit more length to our twist here, and that's going to give us a better balanced yarn, so it doesn't want to curl up on itself as easily. It's okay to have a little bit of a curl to it, because when we set our twist, that'll take care of that as well. And then just as before, we're going to wind on to our area below the spindle. Creating a little bit of a cone shape at the top so that it keeps its balance. I'm going to hook that back on, create more twist by giving it a spin, and keep going until basically we use these 2 balls up. Now, a plied yarn is going to give it a little bit more strength, and it's also going to have a little less energy than a single, meaning that the twist itself isn't going to really have a part in that anymore. It's still going to be twisted together, but you don't have as much of a curl in the twists or in the singles themselves. Winding on. And twist. We want to just make sure that we keep our spindle as balanced as possible as we're plying our yarn, especially if you filled up your spindle when you made your singles. You're going to be working with a little bit more weight, and it's important to help to redistribute your yarn evenly as you wind on, so that you don't end up with an unbalanced spindle. An unbalanced spindle will still spin, it just ends up being a little bit wobbly and a little harder to work with. Plying yarn can give you a lot of different options for creating interesting and individual yarns. especially if you get into dyeing, which gives you even more possibilities. If you are working with pre-dyed fiber, when you spin your singles, you have the option to create a two-colored single, or a two-colored yarn rather, a two-colored plied yarn. And the really cool thing is that plying like this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to just stop at 2 strands. You really can do quite a few strands. Usually up to 6 is going to give you the best balance, but honestly, as many as you want, you really can do. The only thing that is going to give you any problems is if you're overloading your spindle by creating a much thicker yarn than it can handle. If you are working with, or if you're planning on doing 4 or more singles together, you want to make sure that you're staying pretty thin for the size of your spindle, and that you are keeping the length a little short as far as filling out your singles, your spindle when you're spinning your singles, just so that you don't have way more bulk on your spindle and have a problem getting all of it spun. Plying is also a great way to even out a yarn, so that if your singles are a little uneven, if you ply 2 of the same general size together, it kind of gives you a little bit more of a balance overall in your yarn. And that can be helpful if you're looking for a specific gauge, or if you are trying to create something that is less of a thick thin. It's also very forgiving and is a great way for beginner yarns to have balance that you may not quite be able to produce with a single yet. What you will notice is that if you have a yarn like mine, which is a slightly thick thin, that the areas that don't match up in size, the little yarn will wind a little bit tighter around the bigger yarn, and you'll see the difference in the singles that way. But other than that, you do end up with a pretty balanced setup between the 2 singles. We're down to our last length on our single. We do have a little bit more for later, but what we're going to do is we're going to run this ply all the way out to the end of the shortest single. I'm going to just let that sit on the floor for a moment, and I'm just going to cut that at that length, allowing those to twist together at the end. It's okay if the very ends don't twist together completely. It's a good thing we were done too, because our spindle is nice and fat and heavy, and we really wouldn't have been able to get much on there anymore anyway. So there we have it. We have a really nice 2-plied yarn. The next step would be to wind this off onto either a skein or into another center pull ball for use. A ply, if it's balanced well, doesn't necessarily need to be hung and washed, or washed and hung, but it's okay to go ahead and do that anyway, because you can create a little bit more cohesion between the plies. And but that's definitely a preference. You could absolutely take it straight off of the spindle and start knitting or crocheting with it. So I hope you guys enjoyed that, and thank you for watching.